He's around here somewhere, but the hearing today has come to order. We meet for the first time this year to receive testimony on the readiness. We actually met once before and with the same group that's here. And some people got a little upset with your honesty, but I appreciated it. And I think it's one of the big going debates we have right now, and you're aware of this, and that is that we have a serious problem that's there. And here he is, so we can start. We're just waiting. And that is, the American people need to know the problems. And it was from this committee, when we had our vices here before, that it was compared to the late 90s, late 70s, the hollow force and all that. Well, we've got problems now, and I like to talk about it. And the reason I do is because the general public, if they're just lured into this euphoria that there are no big problems out there, then we can't justify doing what we should do in rebuilding our military. So there's a difference of opinion on doing this. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the amendments, or the witnesses here. We have General James McConville, Vice Chief of the Staff of the Army. Admiral Moran is the Vice Chief of Naval Operations. General Glenn Walters, Assistant Commandant of the Marines. General Stephen Wilson, Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force. I thank him for all of you and for your service and for being here today. I'd like to remind our witnesses that while this is an open hearing, I ask that they do not hold any unclassified information back from this committee. Last month, Secretary Mattis rolled out the National Defense Strategy, which laid out a new strategic approach to addressing military challenges through building a more lethal force, strengthening alliances and attracting new partners, and in reforming the department for greater performance and affordability. I believe building a more lethal force begins with rebuilding and maintaining our readiness, while we also look forward to modernizing our force structure. Maintaining and delegate the real delicate balance between the sustained readiness gains while modernized is more important than ever. For example, our Air Force continues to shrink. Since Desert Storm, there are 30% fewer airmen, and less than 50% of the Air Force fighter squadrons are ready to fight in high-intensity combat. The Marine Corps has only 32 of its required 38 amphibious warships, severely impeding their ability to achieve unit training levels necessary to recover full spectrum readiness. Repeated collisions in the Pacific, highlighted by the Navy's need for increase and more training of both enlisted sailors and officers. These are problems that we have, and so that we'll be addressing today. You know, ensuring the safety of the American people, that's really number one, what we're supposed to be doing here. So it's up to you folks to join with this committee in trying to rebuild those areas that might have been relaxed a little bit in the last few years. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses for your service, for the opportunity to visit a bit before the hearing today. I want to thank the chairman, who I worked with in the past, and look forward to more collaboration together and the bipartisan work that's the tradition of both the subcommittee and the full committee. And there is a limit to what we can discuss in open session today, but I echo my statement from last year's hearing and again urge all my colleagues to read the classified readiness reporting that's available to all members, because that will amplify some of what we'll discuss. And we may also discuss later whether we ought to do a closed briefing for any member that's interested in getting into some of the classified update material on current readiness status. Opening point would be, I think we all took a step forward on the readiness issue by the passage of the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018. Not a perfect budget, and there's never been one. We could find flaws, but to my way of thinking, the best part about it was it is forward-focused. Secretary Mattis has been warning us, as have all of you, about the problems of CRs for years, and the ability to find a budget deal, which we will, reduce to an appropriations deal that is forward-focused for a year and a half, I think will be very, very positive in enabling you to plan and predict in a way that we haven't been giving you the ability to do that in the past. I want to make sure that as we write the FDA, the NDA 19, that we take advantage of that deal to really make sure that this authorizing act helps us restore the spectrum of readiness. We've heard all kinds of testimony and information from the various branches about readiness challenges. The Air Force has informed Congress that it needs additional support in the areas of personnel shortages, operational training. We see that at Langley in Virginia, and support infrastructure. The Army needs assistance in tackling personnel challenges, improving critical kinetic modernization capacities, and also enhancing training and full spectrum operations. The Navy continues to cycle through maintenance and modernization while trying to maintain readiness across its 7 pillars. And the Marine Corps is on a path to balance global demand through 5 pillars of institutional readiness. In discussions before this hearing with each of you, you kind of all talked about you feel like we're on a path and we're making progress on the path. We have a long way to go, and giving you certainty on the budget will enable you to continue on the path. We have a need, and I want to hear hopefully from each witness today about how the services will track progress toward readiness through the Readiness Recovery Framework, R2F, to ensure that we meet readiness guidelines. I've said at these hearings before, readiness hearings always remind me of when I was governor dealing with emergency preparation. Most things I dealt with as governor, if I dealt with unemployment, I could ask, what's the unemployment rate? If I dealt with education, I could ask, what's the high school graduation rate? When you're dealing with emergency preparation, it's different. How do you measure how you'll do tomorrow? And readiness measures are kind of like that. How do you know how you'll do tomorrow? And the readiness measures, we need to know kind of how you set them and then how you're tracking toward them. And I'm also interested in, particularly, and I've stressed this before, updating from the Navy on shipyard optimization plan, which is something that we included in the NDA last year. Finally, just one concluding comment that's sort of Virginia-specific and personal to me, but it's not just Virginia-specific. In the written testimony that you submit, none of you address sort of, climate or weather-related or challenges to our infrastructure. And this is a big deal in Virginia. The center of naval power in the world is in Hampton Roads, and we're seeing sea level rise for whatever cause, sea level rise really affecting our installations, making roads into the naval base subject to flooding, requiring resilience investments to raise piers and make other adjustments. And I remember we had a hearing about this once down in Hampton Roads and had 500 people turn out to talk about it, and we were feeling like, is this just us? And one of our DOD witnesses said, hey, try running a military base where there's water shortages. Try running a military base where there's fire risks. So it's not just us. We're dealing with increasing severe weather that then puts a cost burden into how you make a resiliency investment to maintain infrastructure. So I may ask some questions about that as well. But I appreciate all of your service, appreciate this, the tradition of the subcommittee and my work together with the chair. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll hand it back to you.
And I'd say to Senator Kane that I really appreciated the personal visit from you guys to be able to get into these things, and because we're on a recovery mode right now, and it's going to take our interest to do it. Let's start with you, General McConville, and opening statements would be great.
Yes, sir.
Your statement would be made a part of the record, so you don't need to go beyond 5 minutes unless you really want to.
Well, good afternoon, Chairman Inhofe, Ranking Member Kane, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the invitation to testify on the readiness of our Army. In the face of unpredictable, competitive, global environment, our Army stands ready to compete, to deter, and win tonight. While there are challenges facing our Army, we remain poised to accomplish our essential mission, which is to fight and win our nation's wars. We appreciate Congress' effort to end the drawdown and to increase Army's end strength, and we're grateful for the bipartisan budget agreement which will fund Army readiness recoveries through FY19. The demand for Army forces remains high. The Army currently supports combatant commanders with more than 178,000 soldiers globally. Simultaneously, recognizing we cannot fight tomorrow's wars with yesterday's weapons and equipment, we've enacted sweeping modernization reforms. The establishment of cross-functional teams focused on the Army's 6 modernization priorities and the introduction of the Army's Future Command will increase unity of effort, agility, and accountability while building a more agile and lethal force. We request your continued assistance to provide timely, predictable, and sustained funding to ensure our Army maintains the competitive edge and remains the best trained, best equipped, and best fighting force in the world. Thank you for your time this afternoon. Thank you for your support to our men and women in uniform, and I look forward to your questions.
Very good. Thank you. Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Kane, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Really appreciate you inviting us back again this year. And also thank you for the bipartisan budget agreement, which goes a long way towards much-needed financial stability and building a more lethal military force. Once PB 18 is enacted, we will aggressively and responsibly accelerate our readiness recovery plan to earn your trust. As capable as we are today, we will continue to invest in making us even more capable in the future. PB 19 is a strategy-driven budget. It is tightly aligned with the National Defense Strategy, which provides clear strategic direction for the United States Navy. The program we have built is laser-focused on rebuilding readiness and making our teams more lethal. And as Secretary Mattis has stated, it is a budget that restores our competitive advantage, and it is what we need to bring us back to a position of primacy. Last year, members of Congress invested $1.7 billion in Navy readiness. We allocated every single penny of that critical investment to arrest the erosion we were seeing in FY17 and previous years. And it put us on a path in FY18 to restore our most pressing readiness needs. In the past few months, I've visited several units around the fleet, including many being maintained in our public and private shipyards. Last year at this hearing, you may remember us discussing the USS Albany, an LA-class submarine which had been tied up for over 3 years due to inadequate resources. I'm happy to report to you today that the crew is wrapping up their time after over 4 years in the yards and is excited about finally being able to get underway. On the aviation front, instead of shutting down flight operations for several fleet squadrons, we were able to continue operating and training our pilots and our aircrew. We were also able to begin addressing understocked spare parts, and we're able to build a more effective workforce in our aviation depots. That extra money also helped us recover a number of deferred surface ship maintenance and modernization periods and allowed us to restock our munitions. All of this started with your help. So when PB 18 is finally signed and PB 19 is enacted on time, we will be able to sustain the recovery you helped us jumpstart last year and grow and improve our lethality as a Navy. Together, these changes will expand the margin of victory in any future fight, and it will move us closer to the Navy the nation needs. Finally, we should talk about our people today. This year, we are growing the Navy to close personnel gaps at sea, adopting innovative policy solutions to retain the very best talent we have, and we are committed to changing the way we train to be even more effective. As you well know, people are the foundation of our military advantage, and the growing economy will heighten the competition for all of that talent, which makes stable, predictable funding, as reflected in your budget agreement, all the more important to all of us sitting at this table. This will help keep us competitive and allow us to bring even more young men and women from all across the country. It is on their behalf and their families that I thank you for your continued support, and I look forward to your questions.
Very good. Thank you, Chairman Walters.
Chairman Inhofe, Ranking Member Kane, and distinguished members of this subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today and report on the readiness of your Marine Corps. The Congress and the people of our great nation expect the Marine Corps to be forward deployed and forward postured, ready and capable of rapid action to win our nation's battles. Our readiness is essential to fulfilling this responsibility. Previous strategies focused our investments on readiness to defeat violent extremist organizations and meet steady-state combatant commander requirements. After years of prioritizing readiness to meet these requirements, our defense strategy now defines readiness as our ability to compete, deter, and win against the rising peer threats we face. We must modernize to achieve this definition of readiness. Your support in passing the fiscal year 2017 request for additional appropriations provided a welcome step towards correcting our readiness challenges. We thank the Congress's efforts in reaching the recent bipartisan budget agreement. Predictable, on time, and sustained budgets remain the essential requirement for the Marine Corps to meet our obligations as the nation's force in readiness. With your commitment, continued support, we will move forward with our responsibility to ensure your Marine Corps is organized, manned, trained, and equipped, and postured to protect our fellow Americans, assure our allies, and deter and defeat any adversary. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Good. Chair Wilson?
Chairman Inhofe, Ranking Member Kane, members of this committee, thank you for allowing me to testify before you today. On behalf of the Secretary, the Chief, and the 670,000 airmen, many in harm's way as I speak, it's a privilege to be here with my distinguished Vice Chiefs. As an Air Force, we defend the homeland. We own the high ground of air and space, and we project decisive combat power forward with our joint team to defend America's interests and our allies worldwide. Since the hearing last year on readiness, we've continued the longest period of combat in our nation's history, 27 years. We've exacerbated this period of combat with a decade of fiscal disorder. While our forces shrank, our equipment aged, and our equipment atrophied, leading to erosion of full-spectrum readiness. In parallel, as a new national defense strategy makes clear, great power competition has reemerged. Today, our strategic competitors, China and Russia, are moving at a speed and scale unseen in recent history. We must counter that with sustained, urgent action. With your help, we can accelerate the building of a more lethal force, ready to compete, to deter, and to win any fight, anywhere. Aided by your funding in 2017, we've arrested the readiness decline. We began to do so with a keen focus on our number one resource, our people. Thanks to your help, we'll be adding 3,300 airmen a year over the next 5 years. We're also funding more flying hours and munitions, more equipment and parts, depots, training, and our training infrastructure. But we must get away from this year in time to turn the corner so that our resources can be used against space superiority, deterrence, training, air superiority, and cyber, amongst others. We'll then leverage 19 to accelerate a multi-year climb towards full-spectrum readiness. To move at the speed of relevance, we need your continued help in the following areas. First and foremost, budget stability and a return to fiscal order. Second, competitive personnel policies that allow us to attract and retain America's best talent. We also need continued support for risk-taking innovation to outpace the competition. And finally, national research efforts in science and technology to expand America's competitive space. Collectively, these efforts will help build a more lethal and ready force. Let me close with an example of the alternative, of what can happen if we don't act with urgency. And I'll go back to the 1950s when a retired Army senior officer, a West Point graduate of 1924, a Bataan Death March survivor who spent 3.5 years in captivity in prison camps like Cabanatuan, said the following in a speech at a conference. Appearing before you as an expert in failure, an authority on disaster, I am one of the few Americans who has lost a war, who has seen an American army overrun, defeated by a combination of starvation, sickness, unpreparedness with superior enemy forces, and the nearest reinforcements 7,000 miles of enemy-controlled ocean away. I've seen veteran officers change overnight into tired, beaten, unshaven old men just trying to walk to the next waterhole. We used to say if what is happening could happen to everyone in the United States of America for just 1 week, I believe the security of the country would never be again endangered by complacency, by red tape, or by fear of expenditure for its insurance. He went on to say, as a nation, we must be prepared. We must be ready because time is now reckoned in minutes and hours instead of months and years, and in a future war, that time will not be available. Those comments were made by my grandfather, Colonel Ovid Wilson, and I'd say his profound insights about the loss of readiness offer wisdom that cannot be ignored today. So make no mistake, we're again in a great power competition, and margins of victory and defeat are extraordinarily narrow. Time to ready is scarce. Speed wins in preparation as in battle. We must throw off the yoke of the red tape and risk aversion to empower airmen for sustained urgent action. Thank you for helping arrest the readiness decline. We've turned the corner. Now we must accelerate, gain speed, and climb to ensure America's airmen are more ready, more lethal to fight any adversary anywhere on the planet. I look forward to your
General
questions.
Wilson, you just said you needed 3,300 airmen. Are you talking about new airmen coming in the next, what period of time?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's 3,300 per year over the next 5
per
years.
year over the next 5 years. Of them, how many are actually pilots?
I can give you a breakdown
Well,
of that,
we know
Chairman.
the top line figures of those, but are you making any headway from the last time you and I talked? We had this committee hearing which you attended, and that was one of the serious problems that the Air Force has.
Yeah, our pilot production is certainly a serious challenge going forward. We're still about 2,000 pilots short. We have an aircrew crisis task force underway, led by a general officer who shows up to work every day with nothing on his mind but how do we fix this problem?
Okay, yeah, well, we've all talked about this. We did dodge a bullet in terms of CRs, and I think with what we have done, we're going to be in pretty good shape in terms of fiscal year 18 and 19, but then we got we go back to fiscal year 20, which we really need to be trying to figure out a way to do these things more in advance. I want to ask one question of all of you, the same question. Now, we know what's happened to us with our 17 years of sustained fightings. We know the problems that we have. That seems to be all we talk about. But I would like to have you kind of, from your perspective, give us the cost of not addressing these readiness issues. This is a readiness committee. Readiness is what's important. That relates to risk and lives, starting with you.
Well, as far as the risk, is readiness is something, I equate it to pushing a boulder up a hill. And when you stop pushing, the boulder rolls down. And for a while there, we weren't getting the appropriate funding to properly maintain our units at the proper level. We are getting that funding right now, but it needs to sustain because we need to kind of fill in the holes from readiness that we let develop over the last couple of years. We were not getting the timely, predictable, and sustained funding that we needed.
Yeah. Admiral Moran, what would you say to that?
Yes, sir. There are so many components to readiness. You could pick at any one of them and find areas where we need to work harder on, and where the lack of resources, especially the last several years, has really been a difficult challenge for all of us. But I think about it as a capital-intensive service, and the amount of maintenance and upgrades and modernization to pace the threat or get out in front of the threat is an enormous cost, and that's part of our readiness component. If you can't get the ships underway, the submarines underway, or the airplanes flying, then you're going to have readiness problems across the board. I think that's obvious. What always pays for those big capital investments in our business are people and munitions, and we've taken risk in those areas over the last 10 years because the resources haven't been there. Now we're starting to buy that back, but when I think about the people, it's also the readiness component, which talks to experience and building intuition on a battlefield, at sea, in the air. And those things you can't buy back. Once you've passed by a year or two of that kind of proficiency and that kind of training, it's very difficult to buy it back unless you get it in situ at the time when the person going through that training needs it the most.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You know, General Walters, we hear more, at least I hear more about the readiness and what it's taking in both the Marines and the Army than I do some of the other services. How do you come out on this?
Sir, readiness, if you view it as a commodity, you build it, it has a shelf life because it's all about the people. So combine unstable funding and a drawdown, then you lose people and you really lose opportunity. So the opportunity costs of not training over time to build back up, it might be that sergeant that you let out who's had 8 years of experience. Now I got to start over with a private and make him a sergeant. So that's where the condition we find ourselves in right now with squad leaders, and that's where our attention is. But truly, lost opportunity and lost time are something that's not a one-for-one recovery. So I'll echo my mates here that stable funding over time at the right amount and with paying attention to our people will get us out of the hole, and we have a plan for that, sir.
Okay, I appreciate that. And General Wilson, you already answered that question in your opening statement. Let me get back to the budget thing and the problem that we're looking at as we move forward. With the recent budget deal and the pending passage of the Appropriations Act for fiscal year 18, we're already 5 months into the fiscal year, and I'm concerned that the services will be unable to execute 12 months of money and 6 months remaining, and yet the need is there. If each one of you kind of address that timing problem that is there that you're going to have to be facing.
Yeah, that's, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's certainly we appreciate the authorizations for the money that we need for readiness. Now we need to get into the hands of our units so they can spend it. And the sooner we can do that, the better off we're going to be. If we're spending 55% of funds in the last 4 months, some of the things we'd like to do as far as predictable funding and long-term lead items and contracting, we don't get the same rigor that we would like to get if we had it sooner.
I guess the good news, Mr. Chairman, is that we've had 10 years at this to learn how to operate on less than a full year's authorizations or appropriations. So we are ready to.
You're enjoying it then?
No, sir, we're not enjoying it at all. But not to make light of it, it is an important question that we're spending a lot of time developing plans. But I think we're going to need some help with the appropriators on how we spend that money. It's not going to go across evenly. That the ad is so significant that we're going to have to look at having the ability to transfer some of that money from account to account, and we'll.
You foresee a problem in that respect?
Well, I'm saying as we go, as we start to make those plans come to fruition, we may find that we can execute more in one area than another faster, and we would like to have some authorities to be able to move the money around as we go and be able to inform Congress as we're doing it.
General Walters.
Yes, sir. As you noted, we have a year's worth of money ads in 18 and 5 months to spend it. It might help if the appropriators can give us some flexibility so we can spend 18 money in 19 and feather in the plan and give us some authorities to, as Admiral Moran said, move money around where we're executing. So there's lots of things we can do with a little more authority to match the responsibilities that the service chiefs have.
And they're aware of that, and they have the authority to make those changes.
Yes, sir.
Any comments?
Chairman, I have nothing to add. We're going to do our best to spend it in that time frame.
Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, you know, it's interesting, preparing for this hearing today after having gotten the budget deal, it made me think about questions in a little bit different way. I'm always asking readiness questions about budgetary uncertainty and the effect on readiness, and we've been doing this for years, but assuming that our budget deal is a solid one and holds through the appropriations process, let me ask how each of your branches approach a different readiness issue, which is, you know, the more the combatant commander requirements, the higher the op tempo, the harder it is to find time to build readiness. So that's a balancing issue too. So assuming that the budgetary issues are now in a little bit better place and you can work on your recovery path, how does each service branch approach this issue of balancing out combatant commander requirements with the need to have time to build back to readiness?
Well, Senator, for the United States Army over the last 16, 17 years, our forces have been in high demand. We have a goal of 1 year deployed and 2 years back, and we still have not been able to meet that. We're running a little over 1 year deployed, maybe 1 year and 2 or 3 months back. But even during that time frame, we create the readiness. But as we do the analysis on what the soldiers are doing while they're back, they're really getting ready for the next deployment. So they are getting the training and readiness they need to have so when they go into a combat situation, they're ready to do their job. So, you know, we're taking a look at, we appreciate increasing the size of the force, which is going to help. We're also talking to the Joint Staff on some of the missions that we may not have to do in the future to reduce that demand.
Great. Admiral Moran?
Yes, Senator, thank you for the question. As you know, we are desperately trying to drive down the backlog in our maintenance account,
right,
or our maintenance backlog for our surface ships, submarines, aviation. And so the budget agreement certainly helps get after that. But to your point, the operational demand for our forces remains high, like every other service here. But I think that the global force management process through the Joint Staff, which is done routinely, the RFF, request for forces process, everybody, combatant commanders included, are certainly paying attention to the stresses on the force to allow us to be able to have time to train and to do the maintenance. We're definitely feeling that appreciation from the COCOMs this time around, even though the demands still remain very high.
Thanks, Admiral. General Walters.
Yes, sir. The NDS addresses this some degree, sir. Chairman's going to set the globe now and allocate the forces that way with a dynamic force employment methodology. We're looking forward to seeing the results of that, and we've seen a little bit of it so far, where we have garnered some relief for a portion of our forces, and that'll help us build the ROMO readiness back in the United States, sir.
General Wilson.
I would agree with everything that's been said. We talk about being strategically predictable and operationally unpredictable, and how do we do that on a responsive force. You know, I was just at Shaw Air Force Base and talked to the F-16 unit there, and they're the suppression of enemy air defense unit. They're the only stateside unit that does that. So they're the ones that support Korea. At the same time, they have units that go out to the Middle East and support operations there. And because they're their only stateside unit, they're also doing training at things like Red Flag or their weapons school support, as well as doing Noble Eagle. So they are as stretched as they can be, and we need to be able to balance those demands. And to the point earlier, the first thing that's going to help our readiness is getting more people, both on the operators, the maintainers, the intel folks, the space operators, the cyber folks, to help build up that capacity going forward.
Thank you. Let me ask a question to Admiral Moran. I think there are reports that there's a congressionally mandated study about the Naval Shipyard Optimization Plan, and that may be forthcoming later in the month. We hear that it may include over $10 billion of investments over a lengthy period of time, 20 years or more. And then there's a companion plan regarding private shipyards that is also in the works. What can you share about the shipyard optimization plans and how the Navy can better assist both our public and private shipyards in completing maintenance in a more timely fashion?
Yes, sir. That plan, I believe, has been recently signed out as of yesterday's, the optimization plan. So,
can't believe my staff hasn't had me read it already.
I'm shocked. It's pretty thick, and it's very comprehensive. We looked at a lot of aspects of the shipyards and how we can optimize both the level load across our yards, both public and private, and being able to invest in them in a way we know we're going to have to do. You know, the youngest yard we have is Pearl Harbor. It was built in 1908, I believe. Yeah. So it's a long haul, and a lot of those yards need to be upgraded. They need to be modernized to be more efficient, to put the work on the pier and reduce the idle time or the busy time that people have just going from one shop to the next. So that's all laid out pretty comprehensively. It is a significant investment in the out years over a 20-year period to get after a Navy that the nation needs that is in that 350, 355 level. We're going to need to be a lot smarter about how we optimize our shipyards.
I asked for that reason last year, the NDA provision going to 355. You know, it's one thing to say there's a number of ships, but it's repair, it's the manpower for the ships, it's do you have air assets on the ships? I mean, there's so many downstream consequences from setting a goal like that, and I have a feeling we'll be talking about a number of those this year as we work on the NDA. Let me ask General McConville a question, and it's a question that was based on an Army study, but I think it's actually relevant to everybody. Maybe you can address it first. There were some troubling statistics presented last year about the qualified military available population of the 17 to 24-year-olds. And there was an Army study that showed that nearly 2 out of 3 in that age range are disqualified because of any number of factors. Could be medical, physical, mental health, aptitude, substance abuse challenge. Talk about this challenge, if you would start, and if others want to weigh in. This is not, I'm not asking about the retention side, I'm about the attracting of the young side with this much of our population sort of in a position where they can't currently qualify. What do we need to do to build that availability in a more robust way?
Yes, Senator. You know, we look this, you know, the Army's people, so very, very important to us as we grow the Army. And right now we see about 27% of American youth in that age group are not qualified to come to the Army. And what we're looking for is young men and women that are resilient, they're physically and mentally fit, and they have the appropriate character so they can serve in the Army. And we put some things in place. We did not used to do any type of physical assessment before we brought the young men and women into the Army. We do that right now at the recruiting stations. And before they can shift ship off for initial military training, they have to meet a certain standard on an occupational physical assessment test. In order to do that, they have to actually get in shape before they can do that. And right now, we have recruiters working with the young men and women, and we're starting to see, we've only been doing it for a little less than a year, but we're starting to see some effects where we're having less musculoskeletal type injuries. And the other thing we're doing as we bring them through the Army, when they go to initial military training, we're screening them when they get there. And if they're not physically ready to go through, we're getting them in shape. And when they go actually to the units, we're treating them almost like professional athletes. We're putting physical trainers, we're putting dietitians, putting strength coaches inside the units. We're doing that in the 82nd Airborne Division right now, and we're getting much less on the musculoskeletal injuries. And the return on investment is much greater than having a young man or woman hurt and then them have to leave early or paying them disability for a long period of time. So that's a
I am over time, and I may submit that question in the record for others, but I'll yield it back, Mr. Chair.
Okay, good. Senator Roanoke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your service and being here. Admiral Moran, I am encouraged to see from the President's budget requests that ship depot maintenance, and as you mentioned, as one of you mentioned, that Pearl Harbor is a pretty mature shipyard, to say the least. So that the depot maintenance is a top priority for the Navy to recover readiness, and that building the shipyard workforce capacity is a component of that readiness plan. And at our meeting last week, you described the effort it has taken to begin to climb out of the readiness shortfall faced by the Navy. And I look forward to additional details and priorities for shipyard modernization and increases in workforce capacity. So I'm glad that that's going ahead. So after ship maintenance and aviation readiness, what are the next priorities for Navy readiness recovery? Admiral?
Right. On the personnel front, we're bringing in 4,000 new sailors this year, and we're going to continue to bring in new sailors over the next, well, throughout the fit-up to address shortfalls in the fleet, gaps at sea in particular, that we know we have, and we've been under quite a bit of pressure the last 2 or 3 years to fill those billets. So we're adding people to it, and we're doing a lot to try to change the way we train our young men and women as they come, as we call street to fleet, through the boot camp and into the fleet. That training has often been long, too long, with too much information and a lot of waiting around, waiting for the next school to start because we don't have a steady throughput for a variety of reasons that have occurred over years. And also to deliver that training at the right time, at the right place for the sailors as they're progressing through their careers, even in the fleet. So bringing more simulation, more capabilities to the waterfront and our flight lines so we don't have to rotate sailors back to schoolhouses as often as we have in the past. Those efforts alone on the people front will do a great deal to help us on the readiness side.
So do you have the similar concerns that only about 30% of high schoolers can even qualify to join the military, any of the services? Do you have particular issues with regard to the Navy?
Yes, Senator. I think we're all facing that same challenge, and I think one of the key components of that is the fact that the vast majority, at least on the Navy side, vast majority of volunteers who come in are propensed by the fact that they've got a family member of some background that know what we do for a living. So we've got to reach out to more of the rest of America and have them participate in national defense.
Does it help to have ROTC programs in our colleges as a place where people become very interested in joining?
Fully 1/3 of our new officers every year come from the ROTC program, and we couldn't do it without them.
We don't have a Navy ROTC in Hawaii.
I know. I was waiting for that answer.
I know. You've read my mind. We have to work on that, you know? Yes. After all, if part of the goal is diversity, what could be a more diverse pool than people from the state of Hawaii? Now that the Navy is on its way to recovering from a readiness decline, how will you ensure that the Navy is able to maintain readiness at acceptable levels? And what changes in business practices and what level of investment will be needed to smooth out the peaks and valleys of previous readiness efforts in a more steady and predictable level?
Great question. The last 2 years in our program builds, in our POM cycles, we've started at the front end talking about readiness as a starting point, as opposed to the very end, we try to balance with it. And I think that sets a mindset, it changes the culture of how you invest in readiness when you try to lock in what's needed by the fleet to produce the readiness they need to do at the waterfront before we put all the other programs in place and then try to figure out how to pay the rest off.
Well, I hope that we can provide whatever assistance we can to make sure that we don't fall back in readiness for any of the services, and I think a 2-year budget deal will help. And I hope that that's the way that we will proceed from now on without these continual CRs. I have a question about China and the challenges we face. This is for the whole panel. China has invested heavily over the past several years to upgrade their military technology and systems, and whether it is the 5th-generation fighter, long-range missiles, or anti-satellite weapons, the Chinese have used a whole-of-nation approach to quickly advance many of their capabilities. I'd like to ask you, while we all agree that readiness is very important, how do you balance the need to modernize our weapons systems with readiness requirements and other needs to be able to effectively counter Chinese influence in the Asia-Pacific arena? Let's start with you.
Yes, Senator. One of the reasons that we've stood up our cross-functional teams in our Futures Command is we're at an inflection point for the Army. We've been pretty much fighting a counterinsurgency, counterterrorism fight for the last 16 years, and now as we follow the National Defense Strategy, which goes into a great power competition between adversaries like China and Russia, we are going after those systems that are going to deter any of those type of things they want to do. I was just looking at history. It was April 15th, 1953, the last time an American soldier was killed by enemy air on a battlefield. 1953, the great air forces that are here. But so we've gotten rid of most of our air defense elements that protect our units. Well, as we go in the future and we're into this more contested domain warfare that we see in the future, we need to develop those type systems. And we're developing a whole bunch of systems that are going to make us very capable against future adversaries like that.
Admiral?
I wanted to give my friends here a little bit of time.
Really, General Walters. Would you like to respond, General Walters?
Yes, ma'am. So the new National Defense Strategy focuses on adversaries, potential adversaries like China. For the Marine Corps, it's enhanced command and control. It's IW, it's cyber, it's long-range fires, it's ground-based air defense. It's also ground-based counter-UAS because they have UASs. All those things are now in our plan and our budget. And I think you were asking a question about giving up readiness to get capabilities, and how do you balance that? Mm-hmm. How do you balance that? Well, I would say it this way: buying those systems, that is future readiness, because you don't want to fight a conflict with the old equipment because you're by definition not ready.
That's a good answer.
Thank you.
Would you like to add something, General?
I just add the same tagline. I'd say today's modernization is tomorrow's readiness. And we've got to look at how do we do that faster, because we see what China's doing. And so as we develop capabilities, how we do that, everything from our requirements to acquisition to contracting to testing, we've got to be able to do that faster. All of us are doing that. We've got efforts underway to be able to speed capabilities to the field faster. For example, we're building this light attack airplane. By the authorities that you all gave us to Congress, you told us how to do this differently. How do you experiment and prototype rapidly? So we're doing that. This is a coalition of the core airplane. It's economical. It'll help our readiness. It'll help build capacity. It'll be not just an airplane, though. It's an airplane. It's a sensor. It's weapons. It's a network that we'll share with coalition partners so that we can do this smarter going forward. From go to now, it's been 11 months. We've done the first experiment. We'll do the next experiment this summer, and we'll start buying airplanes before 1920. So in a 2-year time frame, and again, thanks to your all's help to be able to do that, to give us the authorities to do this differently, because that's what we're going to need to be able to do to compete. But it's not just there. If I could, go to another area, that same thing happens in space. We have to think, how do we do this differently in space? Because today, that's the one thing that every one of our joint team members use is space, and space is going to be a contested domain in the future. Mm-hmm. It is today. So how do we build the situational awareness? How do we build the resilient communication, the resilient missile warning? How do you build anti-jam capabilities for GPS to be able to defend in space if the warfight goes there. And we've got a lot of efforts underway in our space arena to do that.
So I think as we think about how to contend with adversaries like China and Russia, it's long-term planning that is required. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Hirono, I'm glad you brought up the China thing. I remember so well. Well, actually, back during the Clinton administration, we had this euphoric attitude out there that somehow the Cold War is over. We don't need the military that strong. Remember all the bonuses they talked about at that time. And all the time that we were cutting down about 40% at that time, but not China and not Russia. At the same time, we were cutting back. They were increasing. And I remember talking about this on the floor. You know, what if we're wrong on this? And sure enough, we were wrong. But so I'd like just to address from each of the services the force structure question. As we know, in the Army and the Marine Corps and the Air Force have all undergone strength reductions over the last 5 years. Now, these force structure reductions occurred at the same time of increasing requirements, which we did not anticipate would be the case with the Russian aggression and the rise of Islamic State and other problems. So we, in the DOD, they intended to allow the time for forces to reconstitute and reset after lengthy campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan. But as it turned out, we weren't able to do that. So we have corrected the trajectory and are increasing the end strength numbers in fiscal years 18 and 19. But I'd ask each one of you to believe that the force structure of your service is appropriate and adequate with the changes that we made to meet the requirements of the defense strategy that we're looking at now.
Senator, I believe so. As you and I discussed, we were in a very rapid drawdown, and that drawdown has stopped in the Army. We're growing the Army, and I think we're on the right pace to do that. The way you deter great powers is with tanks, artillery, and attack helicopters, and that's where our modernization effort is, and that's included in the budget as we go forward. And we think these are the right steps forward with timely, predictable, and sustainable funding.
Yeah, well, where are you right now? Well, in each service, I could ask the same thing. On the 1 to 2 time that you're in combat to when you're back, I think you've already said you're not really back it's not a rest period for 2 years. You're back in training and all that. Where are you on that?
And that is correct, Senator. Our units are less than the 1 to 2 kind of dwell time that we expect, and they're probably at 1 to 1.5,
yeah,
which is really not where we want them to be. And again,
and that combined with the fact that they're working during that 0.5.
Oh, absolutely.
Or, no, during the one time also.
Yeah, they're going to combat training centers. They're doing home station training because when they go off to their deployments, we want to make sure they're
Where do you think you are?
Depends on which moment in time, and depends on what the world has to say about it. It fluctuates, but our operational dwell time is 1 to 2. Our personnel dwell time is something less than that because of the rotating.
I understand that.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
very good. General Walters?
Yes, sir. Much like the other services, we're an aggregate of 1 to 2 depth to dwell. But I will say this as we go through this set the globe and where we deploy, and I would just offer this for consideration, that not all deployments are created equal, although they all count on depth to dwell. But for example, the Marines we now have training in Norway, they're actually gaining readiness there. They're gaining readiness to the designed mission. The same with so the only place you lose readiness when you're deployed generally is when you're deployed to a region and you're not doing your designed mission. So if you're used for counterterrorism and you're supposed to be the blunt force or the surge force, then you're losing that readiness. But if you deploy for a trained deployment, say in the Pacific, you will probably come back more ready because you've operated in the environment that you might be employed in. I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay. It does. General Wilson?
Yes, sir.
Chairman, the majority of our folks are on a 1 to 2 dwell or better than that. As mentioned, just like the rest of them, they're purse tempo back home. They're not spending that time at home. There are lots of them. I call it, are you sleeping in your own bed at night metric? And we need to measure that because that has impacts on the retention of the force going forward. In terms of your question about people, we think we'll be growing through this fight-up, as I mentioned, about 3,300 a year. If we do that, we get to about 95% of our units being filled, and that's a step in the right direction, and we need to continue that long-term.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and shift over to you because then come back and I want to specifically talk about each branch represented here about the unique problems that you have. So you go ahead and take over now, and I'll do that.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Admiral Moran, and it deals with the action that the Navy is undertaking to learn from and then make improvements following the collisions of the USS Fitzgerald and then also the USS John McCain. We've had testimony about this in the large committee, but after those tragic collisions, the Navy conducted the Strategic Readiness Review, and that found several, and the quote was institutional deficiencies. The Navy's taken some significant steps, personnel steps and otherwise, to deal with those. The SRR made numerous recommendations to address the root causes of the incidents, and a separate study by the GAO also had at least 14 readiness recommendations to the Navy coming out of this. Talk about the status of implementing. I'm not talking about the personnel side now. I'm talking about just the recommended changes. Talk about the status of implementing those recommendations from both the SRR and the GAO's work, and then how will you kind of monitor and evaluate progress on these going forward?
Yes, sir. Thanks for the question. We stood up an oversight board that is co-chaired by myself and the Undersecretary of the Navy to pull all of those reviews together, to include the GAO reviews, previously completed investigations of other mishaps, that not just the ones we saw, but everything else, so that we're pulling all that information together at once. And then seeing how the 58 recommendations from the CR, the 27 recommendations from the SRR, 14 from the GAO, and all of them, where do they overlap and where can we make sense of them? And then really rely on the fleet to tell us what prioritization needs to occur. Where are the things that they believe need to be done immediately for safety? Those things are completed. Most of them were not a financial burden. They were more or less policy. But we've now gone into how are we programming to address things like common configuration for radars, bridge configurations, CIC.
Bridge configuration, because in these instances, some of the personnel involved were cross-decked from one platform to another, and there wasn't an identical configuration, and that may have been part of the problem.
That's correct, yes, sir. So all of that is being monitored by a series of working groups overseen by the Under and myself. We meet monthly. Those working groups are meeting weekly, and then we feed that up to the Secretary and the CNO, and they are required to deliver a report quarterly to the Congress, and we're approaching the first quarterly report for that, which will lay out all of those things. I am not willing to call things complete until I not only see the programming, but the arrival of the fixes in the fleet. So we're going to track these all the way to delivery in the fleet. The outcome has to be that we have a safer and more effective fleet at the end of the day, and that's the overarching goal.
One of the particular areas I was interested in, based on some of the early hearings we had, was whether there are recommendations for any changes to training curriculum at Surface Warfare Officer School. Is that a part of some of these recommendations, and is that under implementation?
Yes, sir. The new leadership at SURF 4 out in San Diego, Admiral Brown, has only been on board a month or so, and we are giving him a little bit of time to figure out how he wants to take this forward. He just came from our personnel command. He was the CO of SWAS. He understands this very, very well. So he's coming forward through the fleet commanders to the oversight board with his recommendations on how to implement career path changes, manning changes, and the training at SWAS.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Let's kind of do it one at a time, starting with you, General McConville. The Army priorities are, and you don't have to write them down because you know them, long-range precision fire, next-generation combat vehicle. You and I talked about that at some length. Future vertical lift, network, air and missile defense, and soldier lethality. With the priorities identified, do you have a plan to address all 6 of these, or would you like to give us some kind of a priority and where you stand on these priorities?
Senator, we plan and we have plans to address every single one of those. What we're really doing is in those priorities. Long-range precision fire is #1 priority. There's a lot of great work going on there, from hypersonics to extending tube artillery. And what we want to do is probably get down to focus on 3 systems, work with a lot of the other organizations with industry, and quite frankly, have them invest along with us as we bring these systems to bear. But with each of those portfolios, we see 1 or 2 systems we're going to laser focus on, and those are the priorities, and those are the things we need to get done.
Yeah. Well, we talked about the extension of 6 feet and what that does to range. It kind of shows that once you make a decision on a vehicle, on a system, that as outside things change, we can change within. Now, the extreme of that is what has happened with our combat vehicles. As you and I talked in my office, we started with the Crusader, spent about $2 billion on that, junked that one, went to the Future Combat System, spent $20 billion on that, and now we're back to our PIM system that is now being, I think it's on road. We're actually a little ahead of where we should be on that. But I think in that case, that's something that I would hope that we'd have a priority. Do you think that system, the way it is right now, is going to be able to sustain all the previous changes that were made? Because sooner or later, we got to have something, and it's got to be something competitive. We're not ahead of all of our, unlike the American people think, we're not ahead in everything. You know, we hear about what the Germans are doing with artillery and what some of the other, even our adversaries, are involved in. So as far as that as being kind of the stock equipment for the United States Army, think we'll stick with it?
Well, what we need to do is on things like is the capability to incrementally improve those. In some cases, on the PIM, to 10x improve that. And what I mean by that is, as you know, the chassis has been significantly improved to give us much more capability to keep up with our forces. But we're looking at projects right now that can take the gun and actually give us much more increased ranges. So we want to have, with all our projects, is be able to insert technology. As technology comes on board, we don't have to, these are not disposable type systems. We want to be able to insert that technology, keep most of the rest of the system, so we get a much better return on our investment.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting when I was watching the down at Fort Sill, the 6-foot extension and what it did to the range. But while it increased the range from this to this, and I don't remember the numbers, it still left a void in between. And that was something that we're addressing today. General Milley had identified a goal of having 66% of our BCTs ready for combat tonight, the words he used. Where are we now on that?
Well, right now, as far as, and I can do this on a closed session on the exact
Well, it
numbers.
wasn't closed last year when we had, it was at 33, fell at 33 at that time. So we're somewhere between there.
Right, we are in a much better place than we were last year, and I'd be glad to go to a closed here on the exact numbers, Senator.
Good. Okay, in the Air Force, we got the pilot shortage. We have been talking about that. 1,500 pilots, and of those, I think we said 1,300 of those are fighter pilots, and it's probably current right now. I am concerned about the T-6 grounding. When's the end of that story?
Chairman, I don't know if I can give you the end of that story yet. We stopped flying, had a stand down on the 1st of February. First priority is to make sure that we can return to flying safely, and so we're looking at holistically across how we do that. We brought in the Navy, who's had some recent troubles with the OBOGs, which is what we also had. We brought in the NASA team. We've got a full court press to be able to identify the problems. We think it's partly maintenance related. We think there's partly an aircrew flight equipment problem. We think there's a training piece, but we've got all those efforts moving forward. The head of the Air Force Material Command and the head of Air Education and Training Command are meeting daily on this. I expect an update on when we'll return to fly here this next week. But in the meantime, we're not flying about 700 T6 sorties a day. And so there's an impact to the pilot production piece, and it has us all laser focused, but we're not going to return them to fly until we can safely do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, one of those obviously is going to be maintenance. You know, anytime all four services have gone through what you've gone through, it's O&M. It's maintenance and modernization. It's the first two. It's the less visible thing, so that's the first thing that we have to correct. So I do appreciate that. Why don't you go ahead and I'll touch on Air Force and Navy and Marines.
Just one question I indicated in my opening statement. The questions we're seeing in Hampton Roads around sea level rise in our Navy base. As we get into the NDA, we're always grappling with, readiness, and we're also grappling with MILCON. We may be talking about an infrastructure bill in Congress where we could be looking at resilience investments that may not be in the DoD space, but there could potentially be some synergies where we could be doing some potential infrastructure investments that would help. Talk about how you, each in your own service branch, are dealing with kind of weather-related challenges on installations, whether it's drought, fire, sea level rise. How do you approach those topics, and how do you factor in to your budgetary requests or other planning what we need to do?
Well, we look at, some of the hazards that have happened over the last couple, the hurricane, we had 3 major hurricanes. We have installations, camp posts and installations really in all those type areas, so they certainly affect us. We got fires in certain parts of the country. That certainly affects where our post is. The flooding is certainly there. We are building some resilience. Example, right now we're building in partnership at Schofield Barracks, a power plant in conjunction with the local area. So if it'll be used, we don't necessarily need it, but if there's a situation where the power goes out, we'll have that capability. Resilience, it's a private-public partnership, which I think is a good way to get after, and they seem very excited about that partnership that's going on there.
Excellent. So that is a shared investment that's being done by both DoD and the local community.
Yeah, it's actually the community's actually paying for it, and but we're allowing them to use the land, and then if something happens where we lose power, we have first dibs on the power, and it's on the grid right now. But if something happens serious, then we have the opportunity to use it.
Smart contracting. Thanks, Admiral Moran.
I attended a briefing by the Naval Academy here recently, and they were looking out 30 years at the floodplains and the seawall associated with the Chesapeake Bay and the Severn River. And it was a pretty stark demonstration of what could happen if we don't take some action in the next 30 years to address that rise in water level. And as you know, General Walters and I, we share bases of pretty much waterfront property all over the world. So if the ocean's going to rise, we're going to be impacted everywhere. So it does demand a kind of a comprehensive look at all of our bases, especially in those areas that you already cited in Hampton Roads, Florida, on the West Coast in San Diego, et cetera. So we are going to look at that very hard in the next.
I hadn't really thought about it until you were using the floodplain. So we're talking not just about ocean, but about tidal river. So Quantico's on a tidal river, Dahlgren. NAVSEA Dahlgren is on a tidal river, the Potomac. So we're talking about a lot of installations, either right on the ocean, on the bay, or on tidal rivers that could be affected.
Sir.
Mm-hmm. General Walters.
Yes, sir. We're a waterfront organization also. We have come to the conclusion that we're not going to turn the tide, but we are looking at it closely. I've taken, in this job that I'm in right now, I've taken 2 briefs in the last 8 months on what I consider our most critical vulnerability, and that's Parris Island, South Carolina. Our logistics folks, INL, Deputy Commandant for INL, has done extensive work and studies, and they projected out what is the best case, what's the worst case. Now, obviously, that's a big variance in there. But what I do know is that we'll eventually have to bolster that. I've come to the conclusion in my own mind that it's not today. We don't have to build a seawall today, but we have to consider one, and we're monitoring it every day as we watch it. Because remember that started out as a marsh with a little bit of an island, so the marshes turn into seawater, and then the land turns into marsh.
I'm amazed at how expensive sea walls and projects like that are, and so I know how much MILCON doesn't get done. I mean, we will do a MILCON, a budget through approps or work here in the NDAA authorizing projects, but I don't know how many don't get done because of absence of budgetary resources. You start to add in significant resilience investments and things like seawalls, et cetera, you're really going to have a traffic jam of projects looking for scarce dollars.
I guess my message, Senator, is I don't believe it's a crisis today, but it's something that I think we as a nation have to watch over time, and we'll have to make an adjustment because we're not going to, I don't think we can
pretend it's going away.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah, General Wilson.
Well, this last year was a great example. So we were fighting firefighters in California and using our C-130s to help fight those. We did the floods here, or the hurricanes, both in Texas as well as Florida, and as the ones came up the East Coast affecting bases like Langley. So everything we look at in terms of our infrastructure, we have to look at through the lens of how would I build and design infrastructure that would support changes in climate. I think that and energy resiliency across our bases to be able to, as the Army just talked about, partner with local communities because our bases are our power projection platforms. So we got to make sure they're energy resilient.
Well, last thing I'll say before I hand it back over to the chair is, the other, I'm asking about sort of readiness, MILCON, resilience investments, but the other thing that we're seeing around the world is really the persistence and acceleration of refugees and migrants. Often, they're driven by civil war, they're driven by corruption and governance challenges, but they're often driven by big weather emergencies, by long-term persistent droughts. We probably think of migrants and refugees as kind of an episodic emergency, but anymore it's getting to be kind of a permanent reality, and we've seen how destabilizing migrant flows can be. Coming into other nations like Syrian refugees in Jordan. Jordan had enough water for its own population, much less millions of refugees. And so I think these weather-related effects, whether you're planning for resilience on bases or whether you're thinking about the national security challenges that they could cause by pushing people across borders, we'll be dealing with this and having to factor this into our planning for a very long time. Thank you for your testimony on this.
Thank you, Senator Kane. Admiral, I was going to get into this thing. I think Senator Kane already did on the Fitzgerald and the McCain and where we are now and what could have been contributing factors to that. And I think we all know pretty much what is happening there. But in the area of the Marines, General, last year, I guess it was, I was trying to find, last year you testified our F-18 operationally were down around 40%, I quote. Is that right? If my memory serves me?
I think it was about 50% last year, sir.
Yeah. What kind of progress we made on that?
So we've increased by about 44 aircraft. That's good. With what happened in 17, and I'm looking forward to, so the contracts in the RAA have been let. The increase in flight hours per pilot is getting up to not quite at the level we wanted.
Yeah, you're a little higher than the Air Force, aren't you?
Yes, sir. I mean, we're getting about somewhere between 14 and 16 hours per pilot per month.
Which I think, General Wilson, you're down close to 9 or 10.
Senator, I think we got a little bit more than that. We're trying to increase it about an hour per month going forward in this year, and that's what we put forward in our budget, and increase the flying hours to
support that. Why do you think the Marines are ahead of you on this?
I don't have a good reason why they're ahead of us. I know that we're trying to increase not only our production capability, our infrastructure, our instructor pilots, our flying hours, our weapon system support, our ranges and capacity to be able to do that. And right now, I just say we're too small for all the missions we've been asked to do. And going to the people part will be very helpful to be able to turn that tide and get us moving in the right direction.
Yeah, you know, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of pilots, both the Air Force and Marines. And I'm more and more convinced every time I talk to them, it's not so much bonuses as it is flying hours. They want to fly. And, you know, when I stop and think, Senator Kane, our calculation was it cost about $16 million to take someone off the street and get them qualified in an F-22, for example. And so, you know, the money, that's an easy response, but that doesn't solve the problem. And I am convinced of this, and I think we need to get those up. And I know you're working hard to get that done. That is a complaint that I hear all the time because I have a background in that.
Sir, so we've talked about this, and since you're a private pilot, you know exactly that.
Yeah.
Our pilots want to fly. So trying to let them do their job, to take away, to get the right work-life balance in their life so that they can fly, but be able to spend the right amount of time at home. Because just as you said, if it takes $10 million to make a fighter pilot and we're over 1,000 short, then that's a $10 billion capital investment lost, and it takes 10 years to make up. So we're working all three efforts on a production. How do we get that right work-life balance in the middle to be able to season them, to make sure that they're proud and confident of what they're doing, sure, and then retain them on the backside. And I hear the same thing that you hear, that money, certainly the compensation's a piece of it, but it's not the big piece of it.
Yeah, I think you're right. Tony just handed me a note saying that all 4 of the Vices are aviators, which is probably a first, right? Do you all agree with our comments about what's the source of that problem? That it's not flying hours?
Yes, sir.
It's not so much bonuses as...
They didn't come in to get rich, sir. They came in to fly.
Yeah, I know that. All right, you guys, on our side, we don't have anyone else coming. Do you know that? Okay, we're going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Appreciate your time very much, and we're on the mend. That's the message for today. All right?